So, just to clarify first, Jesus is not talking here about the appreciation of beauty. There are beautiful people in the world. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, it's a good thing. Genesis chapter 1, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very what? Good. And that word good in Hebrew is tov, and it's an aesthetic word. It has to do more with anything with the sight. To look at a beautiful woman or man and to find them attractive, that's not a sin, that's normal and healthy. That's not what Jesus is talking about. Secondly, he's not talking about the momentary flash of sexual desire that comes when you see a beautiful woman or man and they aren't wearing very many clothes. Again, that's not a sin, that's temptation. And don't confuse the two. A few days ago, I was working on this teaching, and I was like neck deep in a PhD dissertation on first century divorce law and Greco-Roman culture as opposed to Jewish society. Yeah, so you can only read that for so long until you start to bleed out of your left eye, just a little bit. And so at one point, all right, I need a 10-minute break. And so I said, let's go. I went on a prayer walk. So I walk, that's how off I was by that point. So I walk out of my office, and some of you have been to our office above Barista on 13th, and I walk downstairs, and I walk through the lobby of Barista, and I look up, and my head is in dissertation mode, and right there, right smack dab in between the window is a woman who fits our cultural definition of beauty to a T, with her back to me, wearing very little clothing, thin strap across the back, not much more. In that moment, at a neurobiological level, against all of my will, I am overcome with sexual desire. I don't know this woman. I don't have feelings for this woman. I love my wife. I don't want to have an affair with this woman. I don't even know her name. But there is a flood at a neurobiological level that comes over my whole body, and there is a deep part of me, not the deepest part of me, but there's a deep part of me that wants more than anything to look not once, but twice and 3 times and on. That initial first glance, neurobiological flood of whatever, I'm not a scientist, that's not a sin. And most of you can't help that. It's a temptation. Now, we can't control temptation, but we can influence it, am I right? By the kind of TV that we watch, which beach we go to on Savi Island, or whatever it is. You have a say in your temptation. I think it's Martin Luther for the win in his kind of late Middle Ages commentary on this passage in Matthew. He writes this: "We should not make the bolstering of Jesus' teaching too taut here, as if anyone who is merely tempted to look at another with lust is eternally damned. I cannot keep a bird from flying over my head, but I can certainly keep it from making a nest in my hair, or from biting off my nose." So there you have it. That's just a little 16th century humor, just to lighten the mood a bit tonight. My point is, hopefully this is a safe place, we all know what I'm talking about. And that's not what Jesus is talking about here. So what is he talking about? Well, third, he's talking about when we gaze at a woman, or women, you at a man, but we'll get to that later, in context, when a man at a woman, in order to get sexual gratification from her body. That line, looks at a woman lustfully, is really slippery to translate into English, because in English, the word look has a wide semantic range. So look can mean to glance up at somebody, or it can mean to gaze when you follow somebody down the sidewalk on a hot summer day and you trace the outline of her body in your mind's eye. The English word does not distinguish between the two. The Greek does, and it's the latter that Jesus has in mind. The next word after that word look is the Greek preposition pros, which means to or toward or in order to. And then that word lust, which is a bit of a tricky word because it's a religious word. You don't read that outside. Like the New York Times doesn't write about lust. Master of None doesn't have like a comedy sketch around lust or whatever. It's a religious word. And what we mean by that is using a woman or a man's body in order to get sexual gratification. So the NIV, which I love, is a bit unclear on this one. Here's a few other translations I find more helpful. The ESV, anyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent. Or Bruner, a top scholar on Matthew, every man who is looking at a woman in order to lust after her. Here's another, anyone who stares at a woman in order to fuel sexual desire for her. Or Willard, anyone who looks upon a woman for the purpose of lusting for her, using her visual presence as a means of savoring the fantasized act. See what Jesus is getting at? It's not that first look and that flash of sexual desire. It's not that. You can't help that. A little influence, yes, but you can't control that. It's what you do after that. It's the second look, or the third, or the fourth, or when you replay the movie in your mind's eye or imagination later, or you add to it, or you imagine yourself in a sexual encounter with that person. And rather than override your desire for lust in the language of Jesus, instead you give in to it. And kind of similar to anger last week, you give in to that overwhelming feeling you get, and you cultivate it, you let it take root in your heart, and then grow. And Jesus is saying it all starts with a second look, like something so easy and cursory and that we laugh off as no big deal. If you're a woman and you've been the victim of this kind of a look to lust, then you know exactly what Jesus is talking about. If you're a man and you've been the victim or the perpetrator of this kind of a look to lust, then you know exactly what Jesus is talking about. What Jesus is dealing with is a core problem in the human condition, and that is the way that men in particular objectify women.